Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum. In today's episode, we are going to do our first entry for Zombie Awareness Month, which I didn't even really know was a thing. Fun fact, my best friend who is not super into horror is the one that told me that. Um, yeah, it's pretty, I thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, so every video for the rest of the month that I do is going to be around zombies. So today's is going to be part one of two parts of talking about basically zombie evolution in cinema since the 1930s, which is when it sort of started. I am fairly confident I'm going to have one of my friends come in and talk for the second part, but otherwise it'll be just me. So the first part that I'm going to talk about is going to be movies from the beginning of zombie movies, 1930s, to till the 1980s. And then the second half will be like more modern zombies and things like that. It is going to be just movies. So, zombie movies in general, I don't know if you're aware of how many there are, but there are a ton. I will link the Wikipedia page to below so that you can go look and see just how many there are. You think that you're a horror fan, and then you look into a specific subgenre, and you're like, holy crap, there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know about. So I've been doing the 30-second zombie movie reviews. I'm going to do two of those a week on social, on Facebook, which is also linked below, and are going to be added to that playlist on Facebook as well. But one of the first ones that I talk about is a movie called White Zombie. So White Zombie came out in 1932 and is believed to be the first zombie movie that ever came to cinema like that. And it's a pretty interesting one. It's black and white, so it does have quite a bit of, like old school nostalgia for zombies and the like. And I think that I did talk about this in the 30-second, but in case you're behind, um, the movie was actually lost and wasn't recovered until the 1960s. There was this huge legal thing that went back and forth of people trying to get the rights to the film to be able to freshen it up, to remaster it basically and put it back out for people to watch. And they essentially lost the case. So if you go back and watch it now, I believe I watched it on Shudder. And if you go back and watch it now, there are parts where the sound are perfectly fine, no issues. It definitely sounds like an old film, but then there are other parts it's pretty rough. And it's because of the way they had to remaster it because they didn't get the rights that they needed to and that kind of thing. So, but White Zombie portrays zombies in a very interesting way for the start of cinema zombies, and that's through the use of voodoo magic to use mind control. So essentially, this guy uses a concoction of sorts that someone either has to breathe in or consume just the smallest amount, and it makes them die. And then when they come back, they can be controlled. And it's very interesting because they're very zombie like, but they're missing that piece of the eating and the brains and that kind of stuff. But it's very simple makeup. It's just like dark around the eyes. It's very like dead look to their faces. Like they don't look like they blink. They're very like kind of weird when they move. But he controls them telepathically. Which is interesting because there are concepts that I have seen in other movies and television shows that have to do with telepathy and zombies, and I think it's interesting that this was kind of like the start of that. It's in the 30s, it's funny because the zombies are very like their facial expressions and stuff are very over the top because it's the 1930s. So they relied on things like weird facial expressions and very large eyes and accentuating certain features on the face rather than over the top gory makeup that we do now because we have the ability to do so and make it look good. But it's a very interesting film in that regard, and that was kind of like the start of zombies in cinema. So it's not even this cannibalistic nature of like, oh, it's this raw, like, oh, that they focus on having to feed and that's all they understand, or any of the other concept. It was just this very basic selfish inclination to use dark magic, essentially herbs and stuff, to make someone do whatever you wanted them to do. So it's a pretty interesting concept that that's how it started. And then the other thing, the big jump from that one, and this one is a bit, this one kind of goes back and forth because it is essentially a vampire movie. It's based off a novel, but which is The Last Man on Earth, which came out in 1964 with the fabulous Vincent Price. It's arguably both, because while it's very clear in the book as well as in this adaptation of the book that they are in fact zombies. I mean, I'm sorry, vampires. They don't act like vampires. When you see them and you watch them and like they get close enough to be able to attack, like they're very zombie-like in nature, in the sense that they're very slow, they're very like kind of out of it. They don't, when we typically, especially more modern styles, when we think about vampires, we don't think dumb and slow. We think conniving, sometimes sexual, very quick sort of creatures. We don't think of them like this. And in the book I Am Legend, which is what The Last Man on Earth is based off of, they are fast and they're very different, and he talks about them in a very different way. So the film adaptation absolutely portrays this sense of zombie-like nature in humans that have to do with essentially a virus, which is the other element that kind of makes it more zombie-esque instead of vampires, although not the first to do vampire as a sickness, but maybe the first in cinema anyway. But so it's definitely more zombie-esque in that regard. And I think it's really interesting because when I looked into that film a little bit more and started looking into just the background stuff of Night of the Living Dead, there were a lot of people who voiced the opinion that The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price is actually what kind of set into motion the concepts used in Night of the Living Dead, which was actually confirmed by George A. Romero, because he, I guess, felt that that was a really good representation. So that's what he brought to his film, The Night of the Living Dead. And if you watch them, I mean, they're 4 years apart. Night of the Living Dead was 1968, I believe. When you look at them side by side, the zombies versus the vampires, they're really similar in a lot of ways. They're very slow. They're not like, I don't think, well, I think the ones in The Last Man on Earth are a little bit more intelligent, I would say, than Night of the Living Dead, because they use weapons and stuff, which I don't think happens till the second one, which is Dawn of the Dead. But anyway, that's where he got his inspiration and the way that he wanted his zombies to come across, because they're, when they're chasing people, they're just average people that are just a little bit slower because they're sick or they're not alive anymore. So whatever the case is, So it's pretty interesting knowing that he agreed that it did in fact set the blueprints for Night of the Living Dead, which is such a staple for zombie movies now. Like, it set such an influential path for the zombie subgenre that you can't ignore it. Anybody who knows zombie films knows George A. Romero, knows Night of the Living Dead, even if they haven't seen the movie. So I actually know someone who will refuse to watch his black and white films, but even knew the line, "They're coming to get you, Barbara," because it's iconic. Like, everyone knows what it is. So, and then, I actually didn't realize, because all of these were made before I was born, I didn't actually realize that Dawn of the Dead was done like 10 years after Night of the Living Dead, which I thought was kind of crazy. I didn't realize there had been such a big gap between the two. And it's such a Dawn of the Dead is a really big is a fun one. But I thought that I just guess it seemed like they were closer together, but they really weren't. So there's 10 years to do that movie. I thought that was kind of crazy. So another one that I actually didn't even know was an older film is The Crazies, which came out in 1973. I saw the remake um, before I knew that it was a remake, and I watched it, and then I'd seen things about it being a remake, so I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I went back and watched the original, which you absolutely should. It's so well done. And it's a George A. Romero film as well. But The Crazies is about, this town that's taken over by the government because there's this thing in the I think the water that is making people kind of blank out. And The Crazies, I kind of feel like is a zombie film because of the way that people react when they're infected. So I immediately, unfortunately, I guess through just seeing as many films and stuff as I have, when I think infected or I think virus or I think contamination, I instantly go to zombies. And anyone that has lost their sense of self, that really doesn't technically have very much control over their actions or their speaking abilities or any sort of communication at all, I think zombies. And that's pretty much the situation with The Crazies. Night of the Living Dead is actually the first documented movie to make zombies cannibalistic in nature, as far as like eating the flesh of the living and that sort of thing. Like that really wasn't a thing before. And there are other zombie things in between that time frame between the 60s and the 80s that it's not necessarily the case. And then The Crazies, it's not like that. They just hurt themselves and other people because it's like they're just blank. And they have the same dead look in their eyes that the zombies in Night of the Living Dead, the vampires in The Last Man on Earth, and the zombies in White Zombie. Just this very just blank space, like the lights on, but there's no one home. Like they're just going through with these violent tendencies, and that's it. That's all they're doing. They can't function or think about anything else. And so I think that The Crazies is actually a very interesting film. I always love this concept with zombie movies where you show the nature of what happens to the police and government, or like if they bring in like the CDC or whatever the case is. Like I love seeing those elements because I think it's a scary thing to watch in a film when you watch government officials shooting down people that aren't infected, because that makes more sense than seeing who actually isn't. And then it's a scary thing to think about, but then you think about real life situations and you think, no, it's actually not that far fetched. Like, so whenever there's this government against the people, against the zombies thing, I always am like super fascinated by that. And I love the concept of people against people too, because in the reality is when we're forced in this situation of these post-apocalyptic themes, there is nothing keeping you from being your true self, whether that be a caring person, the knight in shining armor, like the recluse that stays by themselves, or the person that indulges in all of those really dark fantasies that they haven't been able to get out. And that's shown across the board in anything zombie related. It's shown through scenes of extreme violence against people for taking over things, whether it's supplies that they need, buildings they want to occupy. In some movies, it's for sport. There's a scene in the remake of Crazies actually, where there's these like hunter boys. I don't know what to call them, but they're these guys that hunt, and now they're hunting people because they can. It's a very disturbing concept. It shows up in things like rape. It shows up in kidnapping and all these sorts of things, because these people are no longer bound by law or being judged by other people. They can be whoever they want because the world is essentially over in that regard. There's no like normal society, civilization is over. And that's always super fascinating to me, because I feel like when you are facing situations like that, if real world situations, right, with zombies, you are talking about having to hide and be careful and not trust people because you don't know what they're capable of or what they're going to do, which is something that happens in the crazies, the people that come into this town, they just start snatching up kids out of houses. They're burning shit down to the ground. Like there's this, I mean, it's not as bad as some of the more recent ones that I've seen. But it's definitely this whole thing about them just coming in and doing whatever they want because there's no repercussions and they're trying to prevent spreading of this virus, this disease, whatever. Um, so of course this one's a good one. It's a little bit, it's more comedic to me. Would be Reanimator from 1985. So Reanimator is a movie that is a very interesting take on zombies in the sense that these zombies are just smart ass dead people that this doctor brings back to life with this I guess we'll call it a serum process. So he when and you know there's this iconic scene which I'm going to show in just a second, but there's this iconic scene, you know, where this guy he comes but when he comes back to life he reacts very poorly to it and his like eyeballs explode and his face is kind of whatever. And this woman looks to this doctor guy and she says, you know, you did this, you killed him. And he goes, I gave him life.
Gruber.
It is taught.
Of course he's dead. The dosage was too large.
You killed him.
No, I did not. I gave him life.
And I think that's such an interesting concept in terms of zombies. And it kind of goes back to White Zombie with this sense of kind of playing God, you know, playing puppeteer and being able to bring someone back and being able to kind of control that life process. And I think it's really interesting because, I mean, he looks insane when he says it, but it's just one of those things where you go, yeah, no, he totally thought that. He definitely was like, no, like I gave him, this is a gift from me, you know, and it's just interesting. It's such an interesting take on zombies in general because it's reanimating a dead body because you are looking for that missing element in science or you're looking for that sense of control. And there's like a, I guess like a high, I mean, it's intoxicating to know that you have that ability, that everything is at the thread that you hold the scissors to. So I think Reanimator is a big one as well in terms of, you know, zombie films from, you know, prior to 2000. And then the last one that I'm going to talk about is actually one that is a little bit different take on zombies, which is kind of the reason I'm actually bringing it up. And that's going to be Night of the Creeps, which came out in 1986. That sounds right. 1986. And it's a fun one too. I actually thought it was a lot more fun than it's definitely some of these older movies are more fun now than they may have been for their time. But Night of the Creeps is about these like slug looking type alien things that get into people's body and they take over the host.
Hey, dog. Did you see that thing?
And one of the reasons is like, I realize it's like, okay, alien type things, sure. But it definitely makes these people zombie-like in nature and they're dangerous. And they're spreading it essentially, not necessarily through bites, but they're spreading it, you know, through like there's this scene, well, you'll see it in a second, but they spread it and it's going throughout this whole town all in one night. And there's basically just like these kids that are trying to like save their town. And it's a really good movie. It's quite humorous and as well. But it's this concept of losing control of yourself as a human being, which is of course what happens in everything zombie related, right? But this is a sense of like this alien thing. It's not a virus, it's not a disease, it's not some mad scientist. Like it's this something from another planet, another whatever that comes in and takes over and has the ability to do so almost an entire town in one night. So it's kind of a good one, I think, too, to add to the list of just how different people have come across different ways to make zombies new and different over the time frame that we've just talked about. So, and I think, of course, obviously, the most Reanimator is pretty gory. It reminds me a lot of the effects from like the original Evil Dead movie, just very kind of like over the top, like exploding body parts and gushing things. And but I think in terms of like zombie violence, I think, you know, Night of the Living Dead definitely set a precedence for the violent side of it, the cannibalistic side, just the gory over the top, kind of back and forth. And even Night of the Living Dead has concepts, it has social concepts included with people. It's very interesting because when George has been interviewed probably a bazillion times, or was interviewed a billion times, and he always ignored replying to statements that Night of the Living Dead is a statement piece, in the sense that, you know, I mean, it's a pretty controversial time for 1968 for this movie to have a black lead. That's a big deal in cinema for that time frame. And not only that, but all the way to the end of the movie, he is the lead, the main survivor. Like, he gets through it. And then right at the fucking end, he's killed by a group of white men. And it's interesting because it sets such a tone when you're watching it. I mean, even now, it's still relevant, even now. And he always denied that it was on purpose. He always denied that it was like, oh no, he is just the best person. And it's very, I'm not denying that at all. I think he was phenomenal, but I think it's just interesting for its time. It was a very bold choice. But in the movie, because of the time that the movie obviously takes place in, because doesn't take place in the future, you know, there's this guy that leaves him, that had every intention of leaving him to die. Like, he is treated very differently, even in character. And I think that speaks a lot to the movie and shows, I mean, just another piece of that whole people versus zombies, and being able to work together, and whether it's even possible. So those are some of the zombie things that I have noticed, you know, in those specific films, just because I feel like those are big ones. There are a shit ton more in between that time frame, but there's not enough Saturdays in the month of May to get through them all. So I'm just going to talk about those because I feel like those were just ones that really stick out to me in terms of showing the variety in zombies and kind of how they have moved forward and kind of changed over time. Because as I'm sure you're aware, once we get post 90s, we gotta go back to Night of the Living Dead, right? With over the top gore and the stories and everything is just kind of ends up being a little bit less than the variety that we see before. But anyway, so that's my part one of zombies for in cinema from 1932 to 86. That sounds right. Anyway, so part two next weekend. Hope you like this video. Let me know what some of your favorite zombie movies are, especially if there's some of the older ones. White Zombie is on Shudder. And then The Last Man on Earth, I had to watch it on an app called Plex, Plex. And you can watch it for free, but it does have ads, which is kind of annoying because but it you know, I wanted to see it, so I just dealt with it. And I think Reanimator might be on Shudder as well. Night of the Creeps, I think I had to rent. Trying to think. And I have a copy of Night of the Living Dead. So, I have a digital copy that I can watch from my computer. But yeah, so you should check out some of those if you have not seen them. White Zombie is really good. It's got some comedic relief. There's a little bit of love story, and it's still a really, really entertaining film, even giving some of the sound quality kind of sucking and the over-the-top villain with the buggy eyes and the weird eyebrows. And, you know, you learn to love those types of things. All the hokiness and cheesiness that comes with it, especially with it being like a zombie movie. But anyway, hope you guys had a good week, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you in the next one.